If you're reading this, they finally came back. The words were written in fading blue ink on a scrap of oil-stained paper sealed inside a rusted metal box beneath pump number 3. Evelyn Harper stared at the note while cold October wine slipped through the broken canopy overhead. 3 weeks earlier, her husband had left her with $43, a battered pickup truck, and the deed to a gas station nobody wanted. Now she was kneeling in cracked concrete, holding a tarnished brass key that had been hidden beneath the same fuel pump for decades. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know what the key opened. But she knew one thing. Her father had buried it there on purpose. 3 days earlier, Evelyn had walked out of the Greene County Courthouse carrying a cardboard box that contained the remains of 35 years of marriage. The box wasn't heavy. That was the part she couldn't stop thinking about. 35 years should have weighed more than that. Inside were 2 photo albums, a chipped coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom," a winter scarf she'd knitted herself, and a stack of unopened greeting cards she'd never bothered to throw away. Her husband Richard kept the house. He kept the retirement accounts. He kept the lake cabin. He even kept the leather recliner where he'd spent most evenings pretending not to hear her speak. The settlement had been perfectly legal, clean, professional, efficient. The kind of destruction that arrived wearing a necktie and carrying paperwork. Evelyn sat in her truck for nearly 20 minutes after signing the final document. The dashboard clock didn't work. The passenger door only opened from the outside. The fuel gauge bounced unpredictably between a quarter tank and empty. On the seat beside her sat a wrinkled property deed. Harper Fuel and Service. Route 14. Mill Creek Valley. Her father's gas station. The only asset Richard's attorney hadn't argued over. Frankly, Mrs. Harper, nobody wants that property, the attorney had said while sliding the paper across the table. The taxes alone make it more burden than asset. Evelyn remembered nodding. At the time, she hadn't cared. She would have signed away almost anything just to stop hearing strangers discuss the value of her life in percentages and account balances. The drive into the valley took 4 hours. Interstate highways became county roads. County roads became narrow ribbons of asphalt winding through hills painted in autumn colors. By the time she reached the station, daylight was fading. The building looked smaller than she remembered. Smaller and sadder. The white paint had peeled away in long strips. Weeds pushed through cracks in the parking lot. One of the old fuel price signs leaned sideways as if exhausted from standing too long. The office windows were coated with dust. For a long moment, Evelyn simply sat behind the wheel. Her father had been dead for 12 years. She hadn't returned once. Richard always said the place wasn't worth the drive. Eventually, she stepped out. The evening air smelled like wet leaves and old gasoline. She unlocked the office door with a key she'd found attached to the deed packet. Inside, everything felt frozen. A calendar still hung on the wall. A yellowed coffee pot sat beside the register. Her father's reading glasses rested exactly where he'd left them. It looked less like abandonment and more like someone had stepped away expecting to return. Evelyn spent that first night in a folding lawn chair beneath a flickering fluorescent light. She counted her money twice. $43.17. On the desk lay overdue utility notices, the divorce decree, and the deed. Around midnight, rain began tapping softly against the metal roof. Sleep wouldn't come. Eventually she stood, grabbed a flashlight, and wandered outside beneath the canopy. Her beam drifted across the old pumps. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Something caught her eye near the base of the third pump. For bolts. 3 were rusted nearly solid. 1 looked newer, much newer, as though someone had replaced it years after everything else had been left to decay. As though someone had replaced it years after everything else had been left to decay. Evelyn crouched beside the pump and ran her thumb across the metal head. The newer bolt wasn't shiny anymore, but it wasn't 40 years old either. Maybe 10, maybe 12. Around her, rain whispered across the canopy roof in uneven rhythms. She stared at the bolt for another moment before finally standing. Whatever story it belonged to would still be there in the morning. Right now she had more immediate problems. The office was cold. The electricity had been disconnected years ago, and the portable lantern she'd brought from the truck was already dimming. Back inside, she unfolded the divorce decree and laid it beside the deed. The papers occupied nearly the entire desk. 35 years of marriage on one stack. Her father's forgotten property on the other. She stared at both until the words blurred. Richard Harper had always been polite in public. That was one of the reasons people liked him. Even in court, he never raised his voice, never insulted her, never looked angry. He simply sat beside his attorney while numbers and signatures quietly rearranged the rest of her life. The settlement had awarded him the house on Willow Creek Road, valued at $460,000. The retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, the boat, the cabin. Evelyn received the pickup truck, personal belongings, and the Mill Creek fuel property. She remembered the moment Richard's attorney had pushed the final page across the table. This should simplify things for everyone. Simplify, such a clean word. Like 35 years could be folded neatly into a folder and placed in storage. The worst part wasn't losing the house. It was remembering how easily everyone accepted that she would. The banker who approved Richard's refinancing. The realtor already preparing the listing documents. Even Richard's sister, who hugged Evelyn afterward and whispered, "You'll land on your feet," as if losing everything at 61 was simply a scheduling inconvenience. Evelyn opened her wallet. $43, 2 20s, 3 singles, 4 quarters, 1 dime, 7 pennies. She counted it twice, then a third time. The amount didn't change. In the truck outside sat another reminder of what remained. A cardboard box beneath the back seat held every photograph from their wedding because Richard had said he didn't need them. There was also a framed picture of their daughter Megan at age 12 holding a blue ribbon from the county fair. Megan lived in Arizona now. She'd called after the divorce was finalized. She cried. Richard cried too. Then both of them went back to lives that no longer included this gas station. A gust of wind rattled the office windows. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and looked through a pile of mail she had found in a rusted filing tray. Most were old tax notices. A utility bill from 14 years earlier. A county assessment report. Then something else caught her eye. A more recent envelope. Only 6 months old. The return address belonged to the Greene County Land Records Office. She opened it carefully. Inside was a parcel verification notice. Most of it was routine government language she barely understood. But one line stopped her. Parcel 14-3B. Status: ownership review pending. Evelyn frowned. She checked the deed. The property number listed there was 14-3A. She looked back at the notice. Then at the deed again. The difference was only a single letter. One character. Easy to miss. Easy to dismiss. Yet someone at the county had mailed a verification request less than a year ago regarding land supposedly attached to this property. Land her father had never mentioned. Land Richard's attorney had never discussed. Land that apparently required an ownership review. The rain continued tapping softly against the roof while Evelyn read the notice 3 more times. $43. A dying truck. A forgotten gas station. And now a parcel number that didn't quite match the deed sitting in front of her. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, she found herself wondering if the property everyone had been so eager to give away might be the only thing she had left worth keeping. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, she found herself wondering if the property everyone had been so eager to give away might be the only thing she had left worth keeping. The thought stayed with her long after midnight. Rain continued drumming softly against the roof while the old fluorescent fixture buzzed overhead like an insect trapped in a jar. Evelyn folded the parcel notice and slipped it inside the deed folder. Then she sat quietly at her father's desk, staring at the papers spread before her. The divorce decree, the property deed, the county notice with the mismatched parcel number. 35 years of marriage had ended with signatures. This place somehow felt unfinished. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. Pale gray light filtered through the dusty office windows. Evelyn stepped outside carrying a cup of instant coffee heated over a small camp stove. The station looked even worse in daylight. Weeds nearly 3 feet high pushed through cracks in the pavement. One section of canopy metal sagged dangerously low. The service garage door was frozen shut beneath years of rust. A faded sign still advertised regular unleaded for $1.29 a gallon. The place looked less like a business and more like a memory nobody wanted to pay to remove. Around 10 o'clock she drove into town. Mill Creek wasn't much more than a diner, a hardware store, a church, and a courthouse built from weathered red brick. Inside the county records office, she waited behind 2 farmers discussing fence permits and a woman renewing property tax exemptions. When her turn came, she slid the deed and parcel notice across the counter. The clerk was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "I think there may be a mistake," Evelyn said. "These parcel numbers don't match." The clerk adjusted her glasses and studied the papers. Her expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. A slight pause, a second look, then a third. "Where did you get this notice?" she asked. "It was mailed to the station. Recently? About 6 months ago, according to the date." The clerk looked toward a door leading into the back records room. Then she lowered her voice. "Most people would have thrown that away. Should I have?" The woman hesitated. "No. Keep it." She stamped a form, handed the deed back, and changed the subject so quickly it felt deliberate. "Property taxes are current through next year." "Current?" Evelyn frowned. "That station hasn't made $1 in over a decade. According to our records, someone paid them." Evelyn stared. "Who?" The clerk simply shook her head. "I'm not authorized to discuss payment records." When Evelyn left the courthouse, she noticed something else. Across the street, a man sitting inside a black SUV lowered a newspaper the moment she stepped outside. He wasn't staring exactly, but he wasn't reading anymore either. The engine started before she reached her truck. By the time she pulled onto Main Street, the SUV was gone. That afternoon she called Richard. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. "Did you know someone has been paying taxes on the station?" she asked. Silence. Then a small laugh. "Evelyn, it's still a dump." "That's not what I asked." "Look, if you want my advice, sell it to the first fool who offers money. The roof is collapsing. The pumps are junk. The whole property is worth less than the repairs it'll need." Worth less than the repairs. The same phrase his attorney had used. The same phrase everyone seemed to repeat. Yet somebody had quietly paid taxes on a property nobody wanted. Somebody at the county office reacted strangely to a parcel number. And somebody had been sitting across from the courthouse watching her walk out with the deed. Late that evening, Evelyn returned to the office and opened the folder again. She studied the county map printed on the back page. Most of it showed the station lot outlined in black ink. But near the edge of the property line, almost hidden beneath an old fold mark, was a faint red circle drawn by hand. Not printed, drawn. She ran her finger across it while the wind rattled the windows. Then she picked up the deed and the station keys together, unaware that the worthless place everyone had laughed about had been waiting for her longer than she could possibly imagine. The office door groaned on rusted hinges as Evelyn pushed it open, the scent of stale coffee and old gasoline rushing out like a memory trapped for decades. Dust motes hung in the beams of morning light cutting through cracked windows, and a faint metallic tang from the pumps outside lingered on the floorboards. She stepped inside slowly, her boots crunching against gravel and splintered wood, dragging the cardboard box behind her. The folding chair she placed in the corner groaned under her weight, its vinyl cracked and sticky from years of neglect. On the counter, her father's reading glasses rested beside a half-finished crossword, and a chipped coffee mug sat as if waiting for someone to pour a drink into it. She ran her hand along the counter's edge. The varnish was peeling, the wood cold and rough. Behind the register, the drawer clicked open and shut empty, but the lock felt off, slightly misaligned, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Evelyn checked the breaker box. Wires were exposed, and a single bulb flickered weakly above the counter. She set the box of belongings down and pulled a blanket over the chair, adjusting it around her shoulders. The radio sat dead on the shelf, still tuned to a station long silent, a thin layer of dust covering the dial. She counted cans of soup from the small corner shelf, noting which ones were dented, then tucked the last $43 from her wallet into the pocket of her coat. Walking through the main room, she noticed the calendar pinned above the counter frozen on June 1987, and a faded sign reading open, covered in dust and cobwebs. One of the fuel pumps outside had dried fuel stains around its base, and a locker near the back wall was dented and hanging slightly ajar. As Evelyn swept her flashlight across the room, the beam caught a section of wall paneling near the office door that was newer than the rest, the paint still slightly glossy. Her fingers traced the edges. She pressed gently and heard a hollow thud behind it. A small rustle came from the corner where the shadows met the ceiling, like a nest hidden in the eaves. She froze, holding her breath, the blanket tightening around her shoulders. A tiny sound, a creak of floorboard or a shifting object, made her heart jump. This place wasn't entirely abandoned. This place wasn't entirely abandoned. Evelyn stood still for several seconds, listening. The sound never came again. Eventually she let out a slow breath and shook her head. Old buildings settled. Mice lived in walls. Wind found strange ways to move through empty places. There was always an explanation. The problem was that explanations didn't patch roofs or buy groceries. The next morning she started working. By 7 o'clock she had tied her gray hair into a loose ponytail, pulled on a pair of work gloves she found in the truck, and begun dragging years of debris from the service bay. Broken cardboard boxes, rusted oil cans, cracked plastic signs advertising brands that no longer existed. Her father had taught her to work with her hands long before she learned how to balance a checkbook. At 12 she could check engine oil, change a tire, and clean spark plugs. At 16 she could rebuild a carburetor faster than most boys in town. Richard used to laugh about it when they were first married. Later he preferred pretending she didn't know anything at all. By noon her shoulders ached. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the October chill. A blister had formed beneath her right thumb. Every time she straightened her back, pain shot through her knees. But little by little the station began looking less like a graveyard. She swept piles of broken glass from the office floor. She stretched heavy plastic sheeting across 2 shattered windows and secured it with duct tape. She climbed a ladder and pulled a blue tarp across the worst section of the leaking roof. By late afternoon, the office felt almost livable. Not comfortable, not safe, but survivable. She heated a can of chicken noodle soup on the camping stove and ate sitting behind the counter where her father once worked. Her phone battery showed 3%. No new messages. No missed calls. She wasn't surprised. The photograph of her wedding day remained face down inside the cardboard box. She had no intention of turning it over. Rain started shortly after sunset. Soft at first, then steady. The sound drummed across the metal roof while Evelyn sorted through drawers beneath the register. Most contained nothing useful. Old receipts, empty pens, dried rubber bands, a church bulletin from 1998. In the bottom drawer she found something different. A fuel receipt dated September 14, 2004. The paper was yellow and brittle with age, but one detail caught her attention immediately. The customer name line wasn't blank. It read, H. Whitaker. Evelyn frowned. Her father rarely wrote customer names on fuel receipts. Most transactions had been cash. She almost tossed it aside before noticing something stranger. The receipt showed a fuel purchase at pump number 3. But according to county records and local newspaper articles she'd read online, the station had already stopped selling gasoline months before that date. She checked the receipt again. Same date, same pump, same name. Maybe it was a bookkeeping error. Maybe her father had reused old forms. That explanation lasted all of 30 seconds. Then she noticed the signature at the bottom. The ink looked newer than the paper. Not much newer, but newer. As if someone had signed it years after the receipt was printed. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Evelyn set the paper aside and continued cleaning. Near closing time, though there was nothing left to close, she crouched beside the counter to remove a loose panel near the floor. Dirt and dead leaves had collected underneath. She reached inside and pulled out a handful of debris. Then something metallic slid free and landed against the floorboards with a sharp click. A key. Small. Brass. Different from every station key she'd found so far. Evelyn picked it up and turned it over in her hand. There was no label. No tag. No obvious purpose. She looked toward the office wall where she had earlier found the hollow-sounding panel. Then she looked back at the key. The strange receipt. The parcel number. The newer bolt beneath pump number 3. Piece by piece, the station was beginning to look less like a place that had been abandoned and more like a place that had been deliberately left waiting. The next morning, Evelyn heard the crunch of gravel under boots before she saw him. Walter, the retired mechanic who had once worked with her father, stood at the edge of the canopy, holding a paper bag filled with groceries and a thermos of black coffee. "Morning, Evelyn. Thought you might need this," he said, sliding the bag across the cracked counter. She noticed the lines etched into his face, the hands calloused from decades of fixing engines, and the way he lingered by the doorway, as if gauging whether she was capable of handling the station alone. "Your father helped people here," Walter added, his voice almost casual, but there was weight in the pause that followed the words. Evelyn wiped a smear of grime from the counter and peered over at him. "Helped people? Who?" she asked, her eyes narrowing at a receipt sticking out from a drawer, the same H. Whitaker she had seen yesterday. Walter's expression tightened briefly, a flicker of memory passing through his eyes. Names, too many to recall exactly, but he made sure no one left empty-handed, no matter the hour. He gestured to the old ledger partially buried under a pile of invoices. Evelyn picked it up, flipping carefully to a page with faded handwriting. She froze when she saw Walter's name listed among the transactions, confirming a thread she hadn't known existed. "And the pump 3 key?" she asked, raising the brass piece she had found. Walter's gaze lingered on it for a moment. Then he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. "That key. That's his way of making sure it all goes to the right hands. Not everyone gets to open it." Evelyn noticed a photo taped to the inside of a cupboard door, half obscured by dust. Walter, her father, and a boy holding a small trophy, smiles frozen in time. "You were here that night?" she asked quietly. Walter's jaw tightened. He shifted his gaze toward the window, where sunlight flickered on the peeling paint. "Yes, but some things better left unspoken." He pushed the coffee toward her again, an unspoken gesture of support, and motioned to a ladder leaning against the wall. "Breaker box's tricky. Watch the panel behind it. Some wires were replaced by someone who knew what they were doing." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat as she placed the thermos on the counter, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. For the first time since entering the station, she felt less like an intruder in a decayed memory and more like a keeper of it. Her eyes wandered to the corner where the hollow-sounding wall panel still waited to be examined. Walter noticed her glance and smiled faintly, a half-smile, half-warning, as if acknowledging that she had just started understanding that the station story was not finished. "This place, it remembers," he said, tapping the ledger gently with a knuckle. Evelyn looked down at the worn paper, then back at him, catching the light glinting off the brass key in her hand. Somehow, she knew he was right. The station wasn't just shelter. It was alive with the choices, the help, and the secrets her father had left behind. The rain had softened to a steady patter against the metal roof, each droplet echoing through the cavernous space like a heartbeat. Evelyn crouched beside the freezer unit in the corner, tapping its sides with a screwdriver. The sound was hollow in certain places, the metal giving way to air pockets that shouldn't exist. She stood, flashlight in hand, and traced the beam across the floorboards, noting a faint, irregular scuff that ran from the edge of the service bay toward the back wall. Kneeling, she pressed her fingers along the gouge. The floorboard there was smoother than the rest, almost newly replaced, but worn around the edges as though it had been swapped in years ago, and yet treated with more care than the surrounding rotting planks. She crouched to peer beneath the counter. A drawer at the far end of the register had its lock installed backwards, screws jutting at odd angles, forcing her to use a small wrench just to jiggle it open. Nothing inside, only dust and a faded note she couldn't read in the dim light. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She moved to the wall next to the office, brushing away a layer of cobwebs. The paint was glossier there, slightly different in hue than the rest of the paneling. At first she told herself someone had done a minor repair years ago. Then she noticed the outline of a rectangular patch, nearly invisible, where the panel seemed to have been replaced or overlaid. Her flashlight beam wandered to a small dent in the back wall, low to the floor. A tiny scuff suggested that something had been dragged against it. An old locker?
Un cabinet?
She bent down to listen, pressing an ear against the wall. The sound was a faint hollow thunk, deeper than the echo of a floorboard. Somewhere behind the wall, something had been hidden. A soft whistle of wind moved under the cracked window, making the metal trim rattle. Evelyn's fingers traced along the floor, feeling for irregularities. A slight rise, a subtle gap, leading directly to the patched panel. She backed away, squinting at the wall in the fading daylight. Outside, the faint outline of a vehicle could be seen on Main Street, idling for a moment before disappearing behind a corner. No one waved. No one knocked. Just a shadow moving too deliberately to be coincidence. Her hand returned to the small brass key she had found the day before, turning it over between her fingers, the metal cold and smooth. It seemed to vibrate with the same pulse that had carried through the hollowed floor and patched wall. Evelyn swallowed and whispered to herself, almost unconsciously, "It's here. Someone meant for this to be found." A soft clink, subtle yet deliberate, came from the gap at the base of the panel, a sound that didn't belong to settling wood or dripping rain, hinting at a hidden path, a deliberately concealed space waiting for her to uncover. A soft clink, subtle yet deliberate, came from the gap at the base of the panel, a sound that didn't belong to settling wood or dripping rain, hinting at a hidden path, a deliberately concealed space waiting for her to uncover. Evelyn knelt immediately, setting the flashlight on the floor beside her. The beam cut across the wall at an angle, revealing years of dust packed into every crack except one narrow seam running vertically along the patch section. Her heart began beating harder. For several minutes she tried convincing herself there was a simple explanation. Maybe old plumbing. Maybe a maintenance compartment. Maybe a storage cavity built into the wall decades ago. But none of those explanations accounted for the newer paint, the hollow sound, the misplaced key, or the strange receipt from pump number 3. She slipped the brass key into her coat pocket and fetched a flathead screwdriver from the service bay. The metal squealed as she worked it beneath the edge of the panel. Paint cracked. Dust fell. The smell that emerged wasn't mold or rot. It was machine oil. Old machine oil. The kind her father used to keep in glass bottles behind the counter. Evelyn paused. Somebody had oiled whatever was hidden here long after the rest of the building had been abandoned. That realization settled heavily in her chest. She pried harder. One screw loosened. Then another. The final screw dropped onto the floor with a metallic ping that echoed through the office. Slowly, the panel shifted outward. Behind it was not a room, not a tunnel, just a narrow cavity between two wall studs. At first, she felt disappointed. Then her flashlight beam found something wrapped in faded brown cloth and secured with twine. Evelyn carefully pulled the bundle free. Dust exploded into the air. The cloth felt brittle beneath her fingers. She carried it to the counter and sat down on the same stool her father used to occupy. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Outside, wind rattled the old fuel price sign. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Finally, she untied the string. Inside was a ledger, not a modern accounting book. An old handwritten ledger bound in dark green leather. The corners were worn smooth. A coffee stain spread across the lower half of the cover. The pages smelled faintly of gasoline, paper, and age. Evelyn opened it carefully. At first, the entries seemed ordinary. Fuel deliveries, repairs, parts orders, dates spanning decades. Then patterns began appearing. Certain names repeated over and over. Families from Mill Creek. Small amounts.
$50.
$100, $75. The entries were not income. They were payments made by her father. School supplies, medical bills, heating oil, funeral expenses. Beside many of the names was a single handwritten note. Paid in full. Do not mention. Evelyn swallowed hard. She turned another page. Then another. Every few pages, one name appeared more frequently than the others.
H. Whittaker.
The same name from the receipt. The same name that had seemed insignificant only days earlier. H. Whittaker received payments year after year. Sometimes $100. Sometimes $5,000. Once nearly $20,000. Evelyn stared at the number. Her father had never possessed that kind of money, at least not that she knew of. A loose envelope slipped from between two pages and landed in her lap. Unlike the ledger, it had never been opened. The paper was yellow with age. Across the front, written in her father's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. Open only if pump 3 fails. Evelyn felt a chill travel down her spine. Pump 3. Again. Every road seemed to lead back there. She looked toward the dark window where the reflection of the station floated against the night. For a moment she considered opening the envelope immediately. Instead she took out her phone and photographed every page mentioning H. Whittaker. Then she placed both the ledger and the envelope inside her coat. Something told her these items should not remain visible. As she slid the ledger closed, one final sheet folded from the back cover and drifted onto the counter. It was a faded Polaroid photograph. 5 people stood in front of the station sometime during the early 1980s. Her father was one of them. Walter was another. But it was the handwritten caption beneath the image that stole the air from her lungs. Written in blue ink were the words, Trust Meeting, October 17, 1983. Beneficiary, Evelyn Harper. Written in blue ink were the words, Trust Meeting, October 17, 1983. Beneficiary, Evelyn Harper. Evelyn stared at the photograph so long her coffee went cold beside her. The edges of the Polaroid were curled with age, and a faint fingerprint stain crossed the lower corner where someone had held it decades earlier. She ran her thumb across her father's face in the picture. He looked younger than she remembered, stronger, his hair darker, his smile easier. Beside him stood Walter and 3 other people she didn't recognize. Yet somehow they all seemed to be guarding something. Not celebrating. Guarding. The office felt smaller suddenly. The rain had stopped hours ago, but water still dripped from the canopy outside in slow, steady intervals. Evelyn opened the ledger again. This time she stopped reading it as an accounting book and started reading it as a story. The names weren't random. Neither were the payments. A hospital bill paid for a widow whose husband died in a logging accident. Heating fuel delivered free of charge during a brutal winter. Mortgage assistance for a family that nearly lost their farm. School tuition covered for a teenager who later became a teacher in Mill Creek. Next to every entry her father had written short notes in cramped handwriting. Good people. Don't embarrass them. Quiet help only. She swallowed hard. All her life she had believed her father barely kept the station afloat. She remembered patched work shirts, old pickup trucks, long hours, coupons clipped from newspapers. Yet page after page suggested he had been quietly giving away money he shouldn't have had. Or money nobody knew he had. A folded envelope slipped loose from deeper inside the ledger. This one had already been opened years ago. Inside were copies of medical invoices from the late 1980s. Cancer treatments, prescription costs, specialist consultations. All paid in full. The patient name was familiar. Helen Whittaker. Evelyn immediately thought of the receipt she had found and the repeated ledger entries connected to H. Whittaker. The amounts suddenly made more sense. But the question only grew larger. Why had her father spent years paying another family's expenses? And why hide the records? By mid-morning she drove into town carrying the photograph, the ledger, and copies of the Whittaker entries. Walter was repairing a lawnmower behind his small garage when she arrived. The smell of oil and cut grass filled the air. He looked up the moment he saw the photograph in her hand. The color drained slightly from his face. "Where did you find that?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed the photo on his workbench. Walter stared at it for several seconds. "I haven't seen this in 40 years. Who were they?" Evelyn asked quietly. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For a long moment he seemed to debate how much to say. "Your father trusted those people more than he trusted banks." "Why?" Walter looked toward the road. A truck passed. Neither spoke until it disappeared. "Because some things weren't safe on paper back then." Evelyn frowned. "What things?" Walter's eyes moved to the photograph again. "The kind of things powerful people wanted to disappear." The answer raised more questions than it solved. Before she could ask another, Walter pointed to one of the men standing beside her father. "That's Harold Whitaker." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. "The same Whitaker from the ledger?" Walter nodded. "Best friend your father ever had." "What happened to him?" Walter hesitated. It wasn't the hesitation of someone struggling to remember. It was the hesitation of someone choosing what not to reveal. "Some folks in this valley got hurt because they trusted the wrong people." Evelyn noticed his hand tighten around a wrench. "Who?" Again that pause. Then a name she had never heard before. "Benton Development." The words landed strangely, like a piece from a puzzle she didn't know she was assembling. Walter immediately changed the subject. Too quickly, too deliberately. On the drive back to the station, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about it. Benton Development, Harold Whitaker, Trust Meeting, Beneficiary, Evelyn Harper. The names stretched across 4 decades like invisible threads. That evening she sat alone at her father's desk and opened the ledger one more time. Tucked between 2 pages near the back was a letter that had never been mailed. The paper smelled faintly of machine oil and the old pipe tobacco her father used to smoke. The first line was written in his careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, Evelyn, it means I wasn't able to tell you the truth myself." The ledger rested in her lap, the weight of it heavier now that its significance had begun to take shape. Evelyn flipped to the section marked with H. Whitaker's name and traced the columns of numbers with her finger. Repeated payments, receipts, and annotations hinted at far more than casual assistance, school tuition, medical bills, utility payments, even land tax coverages. She pulled the ledger into her backpack and headed to the county records office, clutching the brass key and the deed, her heart thudding with each mile. Inside the courthouse, she requested access to old parcel maps and mineral rights filings, fingers trembling as she compared the counties. Copy of parcel 14-3B to the deed in her coat pocket. The lines matched almost perfectly, except for an easement previously unknown, extending the property farther than she had realized. She noted the signature at the bottom of the deed, slightly faded, and matched it against entries in the ledger. The same handwriting. Her father hadn't just owned the gas station. He had secured the surrounding plots, including rights to water, timber, and mineral deposits, all quietly documented decades ago. While she absorbed the enormity of what she was uncovering, a low engine rumble outside made her glance up. A black SUV idled near the courthouse steps. The tinted windows reflected nothing, but she could feel the attention, the calculation behind the stillness. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown caller. "We're only trying to help," a clipped male voice said when she answered. "That place is unsafe. You don't understand what you're holding." She held the phone tightly, ignoring the rise of panic in her chest. Returning to the records, she found old business ledgers filed under her father's company name, showing corporate accounts long thought dormant. Deposits and transfers aligned with the payments in the ledger, tracing money that had quietly supported families and individuals around Mill Creek. A receipt slipped from one of the envelopes, marked for repairs on a pump she had assumed was permanently out of service. She compared it with her photo of the brass key and the ledger entry. A match. Someone had maintained that pump for decades intentionally. The thought made her breath catch. The property was no longer a junkyard, no longer a forgotten gas station. It had always been valuable, in ways beyond mere money. Legal, social, and ethical value that connected to her father's reputation and the lives he safeguarded. She stepped outside to consider the SUV again, now moving slowly down the street, too deliberate to be coincidence. And then, as she set the ledger back on the counter, the deputy from the records office returned with a single manila envelope, eyes avoiding hers. "This was misfiled," he said, placing it on the desk. Inside was a copy of a county assessment stamped and signed, listing parcel 14-3B with mineral rights and land easements she had not known existed. Evelyn's fingers traced the embossed seal, heart hammering. Someone who had called the property worthless months ago, her father's own lawyer, had now unwittingly confirmed the full scope of what she held, and the realization made her stomach tighten. The station was no longer just a place to rebuild. It was a prize someone else would now fight to take. The knock on the office door came just as Evelyn was double-checking the ledger entries under H. Whitaker's name. She looked up to see Richard Harper, calm and neatly dressed, holding a stack of legal documents in a black folder. "Evelyn," he began, his voice measured, "I want to talk about fairness." She didn't move. "Fairness?" she echoed, keeping her hand over the ledger and the envelope tucked into her coat pocket. Richard stepped inside, placing the folder carefully on the counter, sliding the top document toward her. "This station," he said, tapping the deed, "is part of the family property. We need to discuss the arrangements before things get complicated." Evelyn scanned the papers, an official-looking lien, a county notice alleging procedural irregularities, a half-signed purchase agreement. Every line was polite, precise, threatening without a shout. I can't afford a lawyer right now," she said, voice steady though her hands shook. "That's why I'm here to help," he replied smoothly. "Just review these forms. Sign where appropriate. It will make everything easier." She glanced at the ledger beside her, the Polaroid, and the envelope with her father's writing. Each item screamed patience, foresight, preparation. "I'm not signing anything," she said finally, "until I know what I'm actually signing." Richard's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "You don't understand the situation. These are valuable assets, unsafe to hold without guidance. It's a mistake to resist." Outside, a sleek black SUV idled just past the canopy, the driver watching. Inside, the phone buzzed again. Unknown caller, no voice message. Evelyn opened the top page of the folder, seeing a signature that looked oddly familiar, a timestamp in the corner, a copy of the deed with an official seal. Someone had attempted to amend documents behind the county's back. She photographed the ledger page showing Whitaker's recurring payments and the matching envelope, storing both in her coat. Her eyes met Richard's. He smiled politely, coldly. "Just consider it for the family," he said. Every inch of his posture suggested calm logic. Yet the folder's contents screamed coercion. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She didn't feel trapped. Not completely. Not yet. She had the ledger. She had the envelope. She had the photograph with the note. Trust meeting beneficiary, Evelyn Harper. And for the first time, she realized the documents he had brought weren't as complete as they seemed. There was a page missing. One crucial line that could prove everything her father had intended. The courthouse conference room smelled faintly of waxed wood and old paper, the kind of odor that reminded Evelyn of the office where her father had kept meticulous records. Richard Harper sat across the long table, folder open, pen hovering above the ledger he had tried to present as complete. Evelyn placed her backpack on the floor and pulled out the ledger first, opening to the pages marked with H. Whitaker's name. The room went quiet as she laid it flat, the coffee stains and faint pencil marks catching the overhead light. "These are the payments my father made," she said evenly, flipping the pages one by one, each entry annotated with dates, amounts, and notes. "School tuition, heating oil, medical bills." Richard shifted in his chair. "That's procedural," he said, voice tight. "Those are just accounting records." Evelyn reached into her coat and pulled out the Polaroid photo from 1983, placing it beside the ledger. Walter and two other town residents, present as witnesses, leaned forward, confirming the identities and events depicted in the photo. The attorney across from her cleared his throat. Even if these are accurate, she's inexperienced. She doesn't have the legal authority to claim. Evelyn held up the deed, embossed with the county seal and the signature of her father, matching the ledger entries and the photograph. Annotations. The pen in the attorney's hand froze above a purchase agreement he had intended to use to pressure her. Richard's face went pale as he read the details on the ledger, and then the bank letter she produced, proving trust funds allocated decades ago. A clerk from the county office whispered to a judge about the parcel's easement rights, confirming Evelyn's ownership and her father's foresight. The room's tension was palpable. Every official and witness present now recognized that the junk gas station held legal and moral authority. She quietly presented the unopened envelope from her father, its seal intact, containing the instructions for the estate and ledger confirmations for each payment. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to argue against the combined evidence. The deed, the ledger, the photograph, the trust letter, and witness statements. The room went completely silent. The pen above his folder hovered, motionless. Evelyn exhaled slowly, letting the weight of decades of hidden work and care settle around her. She understood in that instant that she had been underestimated, that the property once called worthless was now irrefutable proof of her father's intent, her right, and the truth of his silent life's work. As the county clerk stamped the deed officially in her favor, Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the window at pump number 3, the canopy dusted in afternoon light, realizing the battle for control was over. But the decision of what to do with this legacy, the lives it protected, and the trust it carried, was entirely hers. Sunlight spilled through the cracked canopy for the first time in decades, hitting pump number 3 and casting long shadows across the freshly swept floor. Evelyn stepped inside the office, the ledger in one hand, the brass key in the other, now gleaming instead of cold and tarnished. The deed, freshly restamped and signed by the county clerk, lay on the counter. No lien, no pending purchase agreement, no misleading notices. Just her name and the legal confirmation that this was hers, as her father had intended. Walter and 2 neighbors from Mill Creek helped her lift the repaired sign back above the entrance. Harper Fuel and Service. Outside, the smell of rain on asphalt mingled with the faint aroma of oil and coffee, as if the station itself exhaled relief. In the back office, she placed the Polaroid of the trust meeting in a simple frame, next to the ledger whose pages no longer concealed debts or secrets, but spoke of generosity, foresight, and care. Letters once hidden in envelopes were now opened and filed. Each payment, each note, a testament to a life quietly dedicated to protecting others. Richard Harper had left without a word, his folder abandoned on the courthouse counter, and the community had begun arriving to offer labor, tools, and advice, their eyes acknowledging her authority, her dedication, her right. One by one, families came to check on the restored pumps, to hear about the scholarship fund, the emergency heating assistance, and the community trust her father had created. Evelyn climbed the narrow stairs to the small office loft, laying down the blanket she had slept on the first night, brushing off dust, and finally sitting in the chair where her father once worked. She held the key between her fingers, no longer a cold piece of metal, but a symbol, a guide, a promise, a bridge to her father's vision. The station was no longer a place of decay. It had a heartbeat again, powered by her hands and the proof of what had always been there. In that quiet morning, she opened the office door, letting the wind carry in the smell of coffee and gasoline, sunlight glinting off the repaired pumps, and for the first time, Evelyn understood. What everyone had called junk had been waiting all along for someone patient enough, careful enough, and worthy enough to turn it into home, legacy, and a future.